Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, wherever you're watching us. Whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching us back, welcome. My name's Sarah Needham, and today I'm very excited to introduce you to Hjörtur. Now, I've got the name slightly wrong in the pronunciation. I'm hoping that was good enough. But I'm really curious because we've just had a little bit of a get to know. We didn't know each other before half an hour ago. And we've just been chatting, and I've learned he's got a degree in anthropology. And as a coach, I go, oh, that's exciting. I love to get to know people. So today we're going to dive in and explore why you're getting involved in Green Vision. I'm super excited to meet you in Malta next month. But I'd like you, first of all, to just give our audience a little bit of an intro as to who you are and, your background.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and congratulations on a good performance on pronouncing my name. That was really, really good. And nice to welcome you all out there. So my background is maybe a little twisted. I started studying anthropology in Iceland, then I moved to Denmark to study political science, which went a little sideways. So I ended up studying in Lund University in Sweden, still lived in Copenhagen, where I studied peace negotiations, conflict resolution, and diplomacy. So I've always had a curious mind, and I always wanted a job where I could travel. And I started working in an ad agency in Iceland, where I did really, really well. Wanted then to get into some international work, UN or something like that, which I didn't succeed in, but worked with marketing, which developed into tourism marketing and working with tech startups, and then into destination branding or place branding. So working with places, cities, regions, countries on the reputation, figuring out what is their identity, what is their potential, what are the strengths, and how could we combine that together into a vision for the future, which is strong enough to bring in whatever talent we want, or companies or investment, etc. So that's in brief my background and what I do. I currently live in Denmark. I lived in Greenland for a period of time. I was the CEO of Visit Greenland as well, which was an adventure.
Everything that you've said resonates so much because obviously as a coach, I'm looking to do this with people, and you're basically looking to do this with entire cities or regions or countries, which is like super interesting. And also this kind of angle that you bring to this is quite often what I've seen from the work that you do is you're going into places of a point of crisis and trying to help them come through that crisis. But I guess what is that for you? Why that driver to actually be at a place where obviously a lot of us would try and avoid, because it is quite a difficult space to work in, to see these spaces at a time of crisis?
Well, yes and no. I think places in crisis are places in change. I got this question a couple of weeks ago at another event where I was. If it wasn't difficult to be in places of crisis, because I would be seeing all the worst of humanity and what human people were going through. And I don't experience it that way. Sure, some bad things have happened, but when bad things happen, we see the most beautiful parts of humanity. It's when people really come together. They put everything aside to help each other. They reevaluate, okay, what is it that we are? What are our core values? What are we here for? And they really unselfishly help each other to get through that crisis. So I think crisis is actually a place of where you find the most beautiful stories of humanity and how people come together and help each other. It is super inspiring. And when you're in a mode of crisis, you have already paid a very, very heavy price. Sometimes a price that you would otherwise never be willing to sacrifice. But when you need to rebuild, you have an opportunity to build in a different way than you had before. So I think it's also an important moment to pause and think about, do we really want to recreate exactly what we had before? Or is this an opportunity to rethink something and create something new, still based on the same values and culture that we have, but in an improved version in one way or the other? We see this often in revolutions, where people work with those visions. Usually they fail, or they need to have 3 revolutions before they succeed. But you have those moments where you rethink things and see a clear vision, but it always takes time to change the system.
Yeah, it's super interesting because obviously I see this in coaching again. The parallels are really similar in that we don't make change from a place of comfort. We make change from a place of discomfort, and it is the biggest opportunity to redesign the bits that aren't working that you were just kind of tolerating before, but they weren't necessarily supporting where you want to go and what you want to do. And I'd never really thought of it on this level, but obviously systemically, this is the space that you and I think both believe that we need to go in terms of co-creating a very different future to where we are today. And obviously we were having this discussion just before we came on that, how do we get that parallel between sitting with the discomfort of knowing how bad things are, but still having this optimism, which I hear comes through in everything that you talk about, as to how we create something better for the future. So you seem to sit quite well between these two worlds.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about trauma in society, and it's always in a negative way. And of course, a trauma is a negative event. But as you say, that's sometimes the event that forces us to reevaluate, to rethink things, to actually start executing on the change that we need, because otherwise you maybe stagnate. And I think, and we spoke a little bit about this before, but I think I am an optimist, obviously. And I have a lot of faith in people. And I think it partly comes from maybe my own background. So, yeah, my mother was a 17-year-old teenager when she had me, and she got into a bit of a trouble, and was arrested for smuggling drugs, and was in trouble. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, she made a decision to change her life, and she went into rehab, and she got education, and we moved to another place in the country. And it was, even though I was so small and so young, I really understand how profoundly it changed our lives. And I could see people who were in the same place as her at the same time, who then all of a sudden ended up in jail, or ended up dead, or had even killed someone, or all of those horror stories. And I started to think, wait, one decision changed the trajectory of my life for something that could have ended quite badly into something that actually ended up quite positively. And that gives me the faith and the hope for using events like that to make that change. How can we change the trajectory that either an individual is on or a society is on, and think of how we can take it into a more positive direction. And when you're in that state of crisis or state of trauma, that is the opportunity where you get people really to rethink and reevaluate. And it's the best opportunity, or the best moment, to think about how we can change into a more positive trajectory. And maybe we can transfer that into the crisis that we're all into at the moment, which is the climate change. Yeah. Something that has been, for us living in the Arctic, so me coming from Iceland, I've been watching climate change in front of my eyes for the last 25, 30 years, seeing the glaciers melt and some of them disappear completely. So for me, it's always been strange to hear people say that, no, climate change is not real, and it's just, what are you talking about? Come visit. There's a glacier that's a popular tourist destination in Iceland called Hjörtur. And about 20, 25 years ago, there was a parking lot created right next to the glacier. So you could just park the car and walk to the glacier. Now you have to walk 3 kilometers through a valley with a lagoon before you reach the glacier. And that lagoon, which is interesting to see, is just meltwater. And that valley was full with ice. And every year, I come there maybe every 3 years or something like that. And the walk through the glacier is always longer and longer every year. And now these effects of climate change are hitting everywhere in the world. We are seeing famine and droughts and bushfires and sudden hails and flooding and all those natural catastrophes at new levels. So the world is waking up and saying, okay, this is real. There's no denying that this is real. And all the evidence points to one direction. It's our cause. We cause this through our pollution. So it's also our mission to change that. And yeah, that's why I'm happy to participate in Green Vision. That's where we talk about change and the future and the possibilities and options and innovation and all the things that excite us instead of just the things that depress us. Maybe I made our audience a little depressed now, but let's hope not.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you've spoken a lot about the consequences, but what would you think is like one of the biggest kind of immediate changes, if it happened today, that would really help shift us in this direction towards creating this more sustainable future?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think if I had the answer to that would be fantastic. But I think it's a matter of mindset, and I think what we need is a change of mindset. And I think we're getting there. We're getting closer and closer. We need to start thinking about the world in a different place, in a different manner, our relationships in a different manner. And in general, we need to think about change in a different way. And I think, I mean, you're a leadership coach. And when we look at leadership has come a long way in the last 30, 40 years. And embracing change. And that's really what we need to focus on. I think the most important skill of this decade is adaptability. We are seeing climate change forcing us to adapt, but we also seeing technology that is forcing us to adapt. It's not 20 years ago with the arrival of the internet, and now AI is also forcing us to rethink our processes and everything that we do. So I think we're getting more and more leaders who are not constantly resisting change and swimming upstream, but that are rather embracing change and seeing the opportunities that come with it, and thinking about, okay, how can I make the most of this opportunity? How can I use this as an opportunity to innovate and to be the one that does not try to protect the past that is already outdated, but to create the future that will make us prosperous and living a better life in the next decades.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I often talk about what it takes to be a leader taking action towards this. And you've touched on a lot of these kind of, it's about co-creating, it's about not holding on to or trying to prove almost, which is where a lot of leaders have been in the last kind of 20 years, is proving that they're right. And now it's, those leadership skills are fundamentally changing, definitely. But I mean, what does it mean for you to be a leader and taking action towards this? What are the challenges that you're facing?
I see myself as a storyteller. So I think for me as a leader, it's about creating the right narrative. Yeah. And to create the right narrative, we need to understand where our audience is coming from. And I think that's maybe one of the most fundamental challenges that leaders have. We have a lot of companies where you have the CEO, really visionary. He's really on board in being a leader for change. We have a board that is very progressive and has great minds in it. But getting that through the entire organization, when you have maybe thousands of employees who've been doing the work the same way for the last 40 years, that's an enormous challenge. And I think for leaders today, that's maybe the biggest challenge. Okay, how do we interpret or communicate that vision so that we have everyone on board? How can we combine that vision with our identity and the identity of the employees and the values of the employees, to get them to understand that if we are going to protect those values, we need to change. Continuing as we are is not protecting those values. It's protecting comfort, the comfort of not changing. So I guess that's maybe the biggest challenge. It's understanding, okay, what is the right narrative here? How do we connect with people, and how do we get them on board behind our vision?
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about this, because what comes to me as you're talking is actually forming businesses as seeing them more as communities now? Because previously, years ago it was churches and it was, your local community. Now a lot of people associate most strongly with their business in terms of community. So, you're now talking about a narrative and creating that, like, that belonging through businesses, through where you're spending a lot of your time, quite honestly. And so how do you help people overcome these kind of challenges in terms of, because I call it alignment. You're aligning, you're taking a stand for something that you believe in, that aligns with the vision of the goals of the business. But how do you help people kind of overcome these challenges? Because you're doing it at a very systemic level in the work that you do.
Well, that brings us back to my anthropological background. and what I was referring to, we need to understand where people are coming from that we're communicating to. So top-down communications doesn't really work. You mentioned co-creation, and I think that's definitely one of the ways forward. We need to include everyone. We need to have all the stakeholders on board, and we need to co-create that vision and co-create the plan of why we are behind that vision and how we're going to achieve the goals of that vision. I think that's the key. So it's through stakeholder involvement, through two-way communications, not one-way communication, but two-way communication is absolute key here.
Okay, so what's one of those kind of, I guess, levers that need to be pulled to enable more people to engage in these kind of narratives, as you call it? Because we quite often feel like, or you quite often see, there are the people who get it, the people who feel like we understand what's going on, we don't have to solve it, but we're willing to be engaged in these kind of difficult conversations, versus a lot of people who are still kind of on the outside of that and not really knowing how to engage. What do you see?
Well, I think that's twofold. First of all, is understanding the values, and then understanding how can we connect those values and help people understand that to protect those values, we need to change. And I think that's maybe the key ingredients in that process.
It's funny, isn't it? It comes back to what you were just, or where we almost started the conversation about this tension between, understanding where we are today and how difficult it all is, versus actually having the optimism that in humanity, that we can fundamentally create something different, but recognizing it as an opportunity to do something differently, to get a different answer, basically, to come out with a different position at the end of it.
Yeah, and I think, I've worked with crowdsourcing and co-creation for quite some time. And one of the most inspiring cases is the moon landing. It's an obvious case that most people can relate to, even though, it happened before I was born. But just, JFK making a statement that before the end of the decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's super inspiring. And over 300,000 people were involved in that process in one way or the other. And it was a success. A man walked on the moon in 1969, something that's absolutely impossible. And it's now more than 50 years since the last time it happened. But it just shows that when we really put our minds together and we focus on a common goal and a common vision, I don't think there's anything we cannot do. And when we look at all the innovation that's happening, and I've worked as a mentor for startups, and so I try to follow technological development. And when I do that, I become very inspired. When I see the ideas that young people have, I see the companies and what they're developing, and even big organizations and corporations, many of them have also taken super important steps in developing something new. One of my recent clients was a company in Finland called Neste, an old oil company, 75-year-old oil company. And I never thought I'd work for an oil company. It's just, goes against my principles in many ways. But this one, in 2015, they decided to remove oil from their name. They decided to phase out all fossil fuels and focus only on sustainable fuels. And they are now the leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel, which can cut down the fossil fuel emissions by 80%. and that's actually in the market right now. And I think it's a fantastic example of a relatively large corporations. They have between 6,000 and 7,000 employees that is doing the change and walking the talk. And it's very inspiring to see. And when we look at all the options, we realize that our challenge is not having solutions. We actually have all the solutions we need. The challenge is making the decision to change. The challenge is being willing to make the sacrifices that are needed to change. It's to understand that, sure, there may be sacrifices, but the cost is not necessarily as high as we believe it is. Very often, it's actually very profitable. It's not a cost, it's a profit to do those changes. But it does take work, and it does take a new vision, and there is a lot of resistance in the system because there's a lot of investment that needs to be earned back. And that's maybe the biggest challenge. How do we get around all that resistance that is naturally in the complex systems that we've built in our modern societies?
Yeah, it's always getting under the beliefs of some of the stuff that drives it, like you say, the values and the beliefs behind what's actually created to where we are today. Because a lot of people still believe fundamentally that we've done well to get to where we are today, and we have at a cost. And now it's trying to rebalance that, isn't it? It's trying to understand how to create a new version of what profitability is, what the opportunity is that lays behind it. Because I totally agree that I kind of talk about the same from a technological angle. Is we've got all the technology, or we can develop all the technology that we need to be able to solve all this stuff. We really need to put humanity back at the heart of it to ensure that we're creating solutions that work for everybody. And I totally agree that there's a massive business opportunity behind this, but it's around understanding what that is and what that new normal looks like. So that, because as humans, we find discomfort difficult. And so we've got to help people through their discomfort. And again, I think it comes back to the narrative you were talking about earlier. So when we look at that, what's your intention with getting involved in Green Vision? Why Green Vision for you? Because I know why I'm involved and I'm excited about it, but I want to hear from you. What is it?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's before we go there, I want to comment on what you were saying about but change and discomfort, because I think I'm born in 1975, which means that at the end of the Cold War, I was 15, 16, starting high school. And then go into political science. And what I'm studying in political science is Fukuyama and the end of history. And for me, it was like, it was end of all conflict. There was one ideology that has proven to be the right one. It was neoliberalism. And we were just on the flight path to the future, to the bright future. There was nothing going to stop the world. We had solved all the problems, and it looked like it was going to be so easy. Now, that's the same generation that's in charge now. People 45 to 60, something like that. These are the leaders of today, and I think it's a big bite to swallow that this nice vision that we had in the 90s isn't the reality. We are seeing it both with climate change. So neoliberalism isn't really working out because we are using up all our resources, and we didn't calculate how we are spending vital resources like clean water, clean air, etc. That was never part of the equation. And then, of course, we're also seeing the world becoming more and more hostile today, which is also quite worrying. And that's also why I love events like Green Vision, because you have a very impressive lineup of speakers. And it's here that we really can meet the change makers, the visionaries, the people who are seeing the future, who are seeing the opportunities, and that can inspire us and enlighten us on how we can change and what we can do to really navigate this chaos that we all of a sudden are finding ourselves in. And maybe my generation didn't expect to be in at any point, because life was supposed to be so easy for us.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so what is it specifically that you want to get out of this summit? You said inspiration, you said kind of hearing other people's ideas, and obviously I can hear curiosity as a driver for you. So you're curious as to what's going to come out, and when you put a variety of different people in the room together. But what's different?
Well, I think network is always an important part of the equation, and looking at who will be there and who you're attracting, both in terms of companies that are showcasing and people that are on stage, and the conversations that are going to be had on the panels. And I know there's a lot of names on the website already, and I know there's a lot of names that haven't been announced yet. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. So I think while there's a lot of information we can get online, there's nothing like meeting people in person and seeing them face to face and having a chat with them, hearing them out and connecting with other like-minded people, share experiences, share solutions, seeing how others are solving the problems that are supposed to be insolvable. But there's always someone who has found a way around it. And that's invaluable. That the value of that network and that knowledge sharing is invaluable.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of what you were saying earlier, how one moment can be so pivotal. And just before we go online, I was talking about the moment where I got a phone call to say that I've got, a baby in the hospital because my kids are adopted, and how that changed fundamentally everything for me on that day. And that was an external kind of input coming into my life. But actually, you never know where these conversations, where these collaborations, where these co-creations can take us. And actually what the crisis almost that unleashes those moments can actually bring to enabling that next wave of transformation. And why we're bringing together obviously Middle East and Africa and Europe, because we see this fusion needs to happen. And quite often what I see is, specifically in the work I do, is there are a lot of silos. And until we start bringing and merging and actually finding ways to almost collide these silos together in a very creative way, then ideas stay in silos. It's a bit like, how many ideas are sat in a university in a drawer somewhere, and you kind of look at it, how does this happen? How can we not take the value out of this? And so that's what I kind of always, when you were talking, that's what came out to me, is it's kind of comes back to this one moment, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And when you hit those moments, it's pure magic. And I lived in Iceland during the economic collapse of 2008. And in Iceland, it was severely bad. All the banks went bankrupt. And I was hired, along with two others, to set up a sort of a co-working space. So we got a fish factory down by the harbor, opened it up to anyone who wanted to come. Either if you had an idea that you wanted to realize, you could come and pitch that idea. Or if you had some skills that could be useful for some of those ideas. And we would often get people that had an idea for 10 years, something they wanted to do, but never really had time to do. Now they just lost their job. They still had some money. And so it was an opportunity to execute that. And putting them together in a meeting with people that had the right skills, the right network or knowledge, and you would see how that idea that had stagnated in a drawer for 5 or 8 years, all of a sudden came to life and became something. And in just 2 years' time, over 60 companies were created there, over 200 jobs were created, and it was magical to witness. And I think, although this is a different format, but some of the same things happen. You get those magical moments, both light bulb moments when you're listening to someone who brings in a new perspective and challenges your ideas and assumptions, and the networks and connections you create with other people. And looking through the list, I need to applaud your diversity. It's excellent with people from, as you say, Africa, Middle East, India, and a good variety of both female and male speakers. And I think that's very, very good. So I look forward to hearing different perspectives and experiences and viewpoints.
Well, I know Sabrina's watching this in the team, so they'll be very pleased to hear that. Thank you very much. But maybe you can just, maybe just to kind of close out, you can share one of the people maybe you're looking forward to connecting with or having a conversation with or listening to on stage, someone who's going to be at GSC that you've seen, you go, oh yeah, that would be fun.
Well, a specific name. Now you're putting me on the spot. I'm horrible with names, but I think
one area. Which of the tracks are you most excited about?
Well, tourism is the track that I work most with, so I'm very much looking forward to that track, and I know there's going to be a lot of very, very interesting people speaking there. I don't want to spill the beans of some of those names because I know they haven't really been announced, and I know others are in negotiations. But I know there are thought leaders there. I know there are people who really cracked the code in some of the challenges that we are facing, and I am very much looking forward to meeting and having discussions with. So
Cool.
yeah, it's gonna be good. I mean, no doubt.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us this afternoon. That's it's been fun. I don't think I always know when I've had fun because my cheeks hurt because I've smiled too much. So thank you.
That's good. That's good.
I'm looking forward to meeting you in person next month. And yeah,
Likewise, Sarah. It's been a pleasure to
good
be here,
afternoon.
and I'm very much looking forward to the event.
Thank you very much. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next month. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.